Hello there, you beautiful people. Now, strings are present in pretty much every single programming project, and because strings are everywhere, Python has provided us with plenty of inbuilt functions that make doing many common everyday tasks with strings simple and easy to do. So in this lecture, we're going to go over some of these useful functions that allow you to do things like find a word in a certain paragraph, or count the amount of times a certain piece of text appears, or remove certain pieces of text from a string. So by the end of this lecture, you'll have greatly increased the knowledge of the Python string toolkit, and you'll also be able to leverage the power of Python's inbuilt functions for working with strings. And what this means is you'll be able to spend more time building and creating your projects, and you'll spend less time getting bogged down in the details, and that means more programming fun. So let's jump right in. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk to you about is how these special string functions work. Well, they're known as string methods. And by the way, a method is basically just a function, but it's specific to a certain data type. So string methods are just functions that are specific to strings. And the way that we use a string method is something like this. You have some string, you type a period, then you type the method name and a set of parentheses. So let's break this down. The first thing we need to have is a string, right? So step number one is to type some kind of string here. This could be, I don't know, it could be like hello. Okay, so you type your string there. Then you put a period or a full stop, and then the method name or the function name. So, for example, one of the string methods would be count. And then you put some parentheses, and in here you might put some other pieces of data. So in here I might put e. So for example, this would say on this string, hello, count the amount of times that e appears. And when we do that, we get back 1. So let me show you another example. Let's say we have a variable called text, and inside here we're going to have the text happy birthday. Okay, now what I can do is I can do text.count. Let's say we want to see the amount of times the letter A appears in text. I could type that and it would tell me 2 because A appears here and it appears here, which is 2 times. So you don't need to have the literal string here. You can actually have a variable which contains that string, which is super useful. And by the way, when you use the count function, it doesn't just have to be one letter. So for example, I could do text.count, let's say day. Okay, and if I do that, it's going to say once because day appears once in happy birthday. So I hope that's super clear. Alright, so you've just learned how to count the amount of times a piece of text appears in a certain string. The next thing I want to show you is how you can quickly convert a string into uppercase, lowercase, title case, and capitalize it, which is useful for all sorts of data validation, making sure your text is in the right format. So let's say we have a string called x. If I go up here, x equals happy birthday, but notice that this time the first letter of each word are capital letters. Okay, so if I use the x.lower method, the lower method, what we're going to see is what that text would look like in lowercase. Okay, and likewise, you may have guessed it if you were thinking that far ahead, x.upper is going to give you that text in uppercase. Now, one thing I need to point out is that this lower and upper method are not actually modifying the original string. So if I type x again, we can see that it's exactly what we typed at the beginning, even though I just used the upper method here. You can see that it's still got lowercase letters in it. And the reason for that is because strings are an immutable data type, which means that they cannot be changed. Immutable means unchangeable, mutable means changeable. So that while they cannot be changed, they can be overwritten. So x is lowercase to begin with. As you can see, it's got some lowercase in it and a few capital letters. But if I type x equals x.upper and I run that, and then I show you what x is, you can now see that x has been changed to be the fully uppercase value. So when we were just running the method on its own, it was just telling us what it would be like if it was uppercase or all lowercase. But when we assigned x the value of itself in uppercase, that's what changed it. You can't change them unless you overwrite them because strings are immutable. So let's go ahead and convert x back into lowercase to make our happy birthday message a lot less aggressive. So if I just typed x.lower, we're going to see it in lowercase, but x won't have changed. But if I type x equals x.lower, we can now see that x is all lowercase. So another method that I want to introduce you to is the capitalize method. So what this does is it takes any string and turns just the first letter into uppercase. Now, capitalize is spelt with American spelling, so instead of the S, you put a Z, like this. So x dot capitalize with a Z, and that is going to show us, basically it's going to take just the first letter, which is H, and turn it into an uppercase version of itself. But again, x hasn't actually changed because we didn't overwrite it. So I'm going to go ahead and make a bit more space by just typing enter a few times. Okay, so what if we wanted to capitalize the start of every word? Well, for that, we'd need to use the title method. So if I type x.title, you're going to see now that H has been capitalized because it's the start of the first word, and B has been capitalized because it's the start of the second word. But again, remember, because we didn't overwrite it, x hasn't changed until I write x equals x.title, and now x will have been changed. Now, sometimes when you're working with logic, which we're going to come on to in a later section of the course, you might want to know whether a piece of text is lowercase or is uppercase or is title case, etc. So the way that we can do that is with the, for example, if you wanted to check if x is lowercase, it's not, but look, what you type is x.islower. And when it runs out, it's going to tell us false, basically because x isn't lowercase, right? So what if I did x.isupper? If that's out of the way, x.isupper will also tell us false because it's not uppercase. But if I do x.istitle and run that, it's going to tell us true because x is indeed title case because the first letter of each word is capitalized. We can also find if text contains just letters. So for example, x.isalpha is going to tell us whether everything in x is letters. So if I do that, it's going to say false. And the reason it's going to say false, if I show you x again, is because x actually contains a space, and a space isn't a letter. So this just shows you sometimes how you can be expecting one answer, but a computer gives you the other thing because it's just so picky about what it works with, right? So if a space is in the text, x.isalpha is going to give false. But if I had another piece of text like ABCD and I did isalpha on that, that's going to tell me true because there's no spaces and it's all letters. You can also check whether a piece of text contains just numbers using the isdigit method. So if I do x.isdigit and run that, it's going to tell us false because obviously x isn't all numbers. But if I had 1, 2, 3, for example, and I did isdigit on that, that's going to tell us true because this contains all numbers. You can also check whether a piece of text contains only alpha-numeric characters, and by that I mean the text only contains letters A through Z and numbers 0 through 9. So if I had another piece of text called Y and I set that equal to happy birthday 1, 2, 3, and I did y.isalnum, so for is alpha-numeric, then that will tell us true. But if I add any other kind of punctuation, so if, say for example, if I did y equals happy birthday exclamation mark 1, 2, 3, and I did y.isalnum, so I've only added the exclamation mark, and that's going to now tell me false because the exclamation mark isn't a letter or a number. So as this video is getting a bit long, I'm going to cut it short here, and we'll continue with a few more methods in the next video. But just as a quick review of what we did, we learned that the way that you use string methods is you have some kind of string, you type a full stop or a period, the method name, and a pair of parentheses, and sometimes you might put something inside of there. Okay, and the methods that you learned were the dot lower, the dot upper, you learned also the dot title, the dot capitalize, which allows you to put your text in all different types of forms. Capitalize turns just the first letter capital. Title turns the first letter of every word capital, this turns everything capital, and this turns everything lower. You also learnt ways to check whether things were lowercase or not, and uppercase. So you got dot is lower, you got dot is upper, you've got dot is title, like that. And you also had a few other things to check whether strings contain certain stuff. So you had dot count, to count the amount of times a letter appeared. So dot count A would count the amount of times A appeared. You also had dot is alpha to check whether things only contained letters. You had dot is digit to check that things only contained digits. And finally you had, actually let me keep that there, and finally you had dot is alnum, which checked whether your string only contained alphanumeric characters, which are letters and numbers. So use this lecture as a reference in the future, or at least just to know what exists. I'm not expecting you to memorize this stuff. We're going to get plenty of practice using it. But there's a few more things that I want to show you when you work with strings before we jump into the project. So we'll go over those in the next lecture. It should be quite a short one because we're nearly there. And then we'll start applying this in practice. Hello there, you beautiful people. Let's pick up where we left off in the last video. I've cleaned out the shell by opening a new one, basically. So let's get going. You can also search for pieces of text inside another. So, for example, if I did, say if I had X is happy birthday, and I did X dot index of birthday, right? This is going to give us back 6. And the reason for this is because every single piece of a string, every single letter has its own address, basically. It has its own index. And these indexes are just numbers, but they start counting from 0. So 0 would be H, 1 would be A, 2 would be P, 3 would be P, 4 would be Y, 5 would be this space, and 6 would be the start of our string birthday. But what if that string doesn't exist? Let's say if I did x.index of blah, 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 something like that. So if I did that, we're going to get what's called a value error, saying that the substring is not found. So either index gives you the index of where that string starts, or it gives you an error. Now, there is another way to finding certain small strings inside your big strings, and that is called the find method. So I could do x.find of birthday, and that's going to give us 6, just like index did. But the difference is, if I do x.find of some random text, instead of giving us an error, it's going to give us -1. So find is used if you don't want your program to crash in that instance. It's because -1 is still valid, right? It's not an error. But index is used if you want something to just hard stop if something goes wrong. So you've got a bit of flexibility there in how you want to use these methods. Do bear in mind, however, that these methods are case sensitive. So while x.index of birthday in lowercase is going to be fine, if I do x.index of birthday like that with a capital B, that's going to give us an error, say a value error saying the substring is not found. Likewise for x.find, if I do birthday lowercase, that's going to work, but x.find of the capital birthday is also going to give us the -1, which it got for just this random string up here. So make sure that when you use these methods that you match the case. And this is why, sometimes you use those dot lower and those dot upper methods, because sometimes you want to convert the string into a certain format before you try to find it, or you want to, make sure that everything works together fine. So that's just something to bear in mind there. So another thing that you can do is to strip certain pieces of text from the side, from either side of our string. So let's say we have a variable called y, and that is 0000000 happy birthday 0000000, like that. So we've got zeros on either side. We can strip off these zeros using the strip function. So y.strip 0 is going to give us happy birthday. So it removed all the zeros from either side of the string. but you can just strip one side as well. So y dot lstrip 0 is going to just strip y from just strip zeros from the left hand side of y, like that. Y dot rstrip is just going to strip zeros from the right hand side of y. But if you just do general strip, that's going to do both sides. But do bear in mind that, again, because strings are immutable, this isn't actually changing the original y. Okay, this is just showing you what it would be like if you overwrote y with that thing, right? So strings are immutable, so you can't just change them that easily unless you overwrite them. Now, by default with the strip method, if you don't put anything in the parentheses, so say if I just did y.strip like that, it'll still work, okay, but nothing particularly happens. What it does if you don't put anything in the parentheses is that the strip method is going to strip away any spaces from both sides of the text. So why is this useful? Well, let's say I have an input, right, and I want to take someone's name. Name equals input of what is your name. Okay, and then I see this come up and I type Z and I accidentally hit a space, right, and I press enter. If I print that name, we're going to see that there is indeed, see, like I can't drag any further, but there is indeed a space in that variable. And I could show you the length of it. Actually, the length of the name, you can find the length of a string using the len method. Length of name, it's going to tell me 4 because we've got 3 letters and a space. But if I wanted to prevent that error from happening, what I could do is when I define this input here, name equals input, whatever it is, dot strip. Okay, so what this is going to do is it's going to take this input function is going to give us whatever we put in. Then it's going to then we're going to use the strip method to strip off whatever this string is and then save that in name. So if I do that, it's going to ask me what my name is. I'm going to say Z and I'm going to press many spaces like that. Now, if I print the name, it's just going to say that, but you can see that there's actually no spaces at the end, and I can check the length of the name, and it's going to tell me there's 3. So even though I typed all of these spaces here, because I used the strip method on whatever was inputted and then saved it in the name, we've managed to strip off all the extra spaces, which can in fact cause a lot of errors and a lot of problems in your code if you don't take care of those up front. So it's a bit of a housekeeping kind of method, which is very useful. So with that, I think I'll bring to an end this discussion of all string methods. And as promised, I'm sure you've greatly expanded your repertoire of string methods and things you can do with strings by looking at this discussion. So in this lecture, we had a look at the find method, and the index methods. Let's start there. We had a look at the index method, which allows you to find the position of a piece of text within another. And if that piece of text doesn't exist, then it's going to give you a value error, which could potentially stop your code dead in its tracks. But you've got the option to use the find method as well, which will work pretty much exactly the same, except instead of giving an error when a piece of text doesn't exist, it's going to give you -1, which perhaps is a more friendly way of stopping your code or telling you there's a problem without crashing the whole thing. But it's up to you on how you want to design your program. Sometimes an error may be more appropriate. We also saw about the strip method. So you can use the strip method to strip away pieces of extra text from a string. For example, here we had y with loads of zeros on either side. We stripped away the zeros, and that will remove zeros from the left and zeros from the right. Strip by default takes away both sides. You can just take stuff on the left. So lstrip for left strip is going to remove them just from the left. rstrip is going to remove them just from the right. And if you don't put anything inside the parentheses, like here, that will by default strip away any white space or any spaces that the user accidentally types. And this is very useful when you're taking input, like here, because the user might accidentally type a space, or in my case, loads of spaces. And by using strip, you can get rid of these issues and stop problems going on in your code later on. And also you learned about the len function, which is short for length, and that will find you the length of a string. Now you can look up all these and all the other things that are available for strings by going over to the Python docs. So I'll show you how to do that. Help, then Python docs, and you will see down here on the left we want to go into the Python standard library. So let's click on that, and there is, if you look here in section 4.7, you can see the text sequence type, str. It's basically a string, isn't it? So let's click that. And if you scroll down to section 4.7.1, you can see string methods. So here you've got capitalize, you've got count, and other things like that. So there's quite a few of them. Isalnum, isalpha, isdigit, isdecimal. You've got things that we saw and new things for you to check out if you would like. So I will leave that there. Up next, we're going to be looking at an incredibly useful concept in Python, which is slicing. And yes, it is as cool as it sounds. Slicing allows us to take a slice of a string and play with it as its own little string. So this is useful for all kinds of things, such as moving around words and letters, as well as checking if certain pieces of text are how they should be, without checking the whole string, as a whole. So I won't spoil any of the good stuff here, but just know that slicing is super useful, and especially for our email slicer project, so you're going to want to know about it. So I will see you guys in the next video.